Hello, my friends. And it looks like today a very tricky game is unfolding around the negotiations. Putin has agreed to a meeting, but it will take place without Trump. At the same time, the US and Europe have already begun working on providing Ukraine with security guarantees, something Putin has been categorically against. The US and Europe are immediately starting work on providing Kyiv with reliable security guarantees in order to pave the way for a meeting between Putin and Zelensky. It's reported that these guarantees will focus on strengthening Ukraine's armed forces and capabilities without any restrictions. The main goal is to avoid Russia's demands to limit the size of Kyiv's armed forces under a future peace deal. The security guarantees package will be based on the work of the so-called coalition of the willing. In the future, it's expected that multinational forces will also be part of this plan. It's also reported that 10 countries are ready to send their troops to Ukraine. 10 countries are ready to send troops to Ukraine as part of a peace agreement. According to sources, European leaders are actively using Trump's official support to prepare a new security guarantee package for Ukraine. In the coming days, a plan is expected to be approved that would include the deployment of British and French troops in Ukraine as part of a potential peace deal. In total, about 10 countries are ready to send their forces to the country. According to European Council President Antonio Costa, the terms of the guarantees should be agreed upon this week. But Putin has stated that this is unacceptable for him. This was one of the key points that mattered greatly to him. And yet, preparations are already underway. Zelensky has also made it clear that Ukraine will not give up its land to Russia and that territorial issues will be handled directly with Putin. This creates rather unclear positions ahead of the negotiations, but in any case, today everyone is preparing for the meeting between Zelensky and Putin. Trump has said that first they need to hold talks on their own. Trump doesn't plan to take part in the possible meeting between Putin and Zelensky. It takes two to tango. I told him, Putin, that we would arrange a meeting with President Zelensky and you will meet with him. And then, after the meeting, if things go well, I'll join in and we'll wrap it all up. It's also reported today that Trump called Orbán to make sure he doesn't block Ukraine's European Union accession talks. Trump phoned Hungarian President Orbán to discuss why he is blocking negotiations on Ukraine's entry into the European Union following talks with Zelensky. At the White House, they stated that he is doing all this because he wants to get into heaven.
Said on Fox News this morning that he's partially seeking peace in order to get to heaven. Was he joking, or is there spiritual motivation behind his peace deals here?
I think the president was serious. I think the president wants to get to heaven, as I hope we all do in this room as well.
Friends, be sure to write your thoughts about this in the comments. And earlier, Lavrov had claimed that before direct talks between Putin and Zelensky could happen, delegations first needed to agree on concrete ceasefire conditions. Today, he quickly changed his position and insisted that they never rejected direct negotiations.
We are not refusing any format of work, neither bilateral nor trilateral. The president has said this repeatedly. The key is that whether it's 1+1, 1+2, or multilateral formats, and there are quite a few of those, including within the United Nations framework, these formats should not be used just so someone could write about them in the morning papers or show them on TV in the evening. They should serve the real purpose, step by step, gradually, starting from the expert level, and then moving through all necessary stages to prepare summits. This is the kind of serious approach we will always support. Any contacts involving top leaders must be prepared with the utmost care.
So, today we see Russia's cunning game. Perhaps they really do want to pause the war so that Trump calms down and backs away from supporting Ukraine, and then later, once they've gathered strength, Russia might try to strike again. But for now, it remains completely unclear how Putin could ever agree to NATO troops being deployed on Ukrainian soil. That's why we wait for the negotiations. The exact date is still unknown. And on the front line, the fighting continues, and today we have to start with the Kostiantynivka direction, since once again there is bad news from here. The Russians managed to advance 5.5 kilometers toward the village of Bereztok, and that is very significant breakthrough. This means they're getting closer to Kostiantynivka from the south. In addition, they pushed forward 3 kilometers 200 meters toward Katerynivka, where it's clear that Ukrainian forces are in danger of encirclement. Meanwhile, battles are ongoing for Alexandru Shultine, and Russian troops are trying to break through near Chasiv Yar, Rusin Yar, and Poltavka. For the second time now, Russian war correspondents are claiming that they allegedly entering the city, and geolocation maps already show the gray zone expanding by 3.5 kilometers, which is quite significant. We're still waiting for confirmation from the Ukrainian side, but this is not the first such claim from the Russians, so there is a real possibility that the Russians are indeed making a breakthrough in this direction. Clearly, the front here is beginning to sag badly, and the Russians are already practically at the outskirts of the city. The situation is definitely worsening. In the Dobropillia direction, the Russians continue with heavy shelling, and assaults have been recorded on the villages of Dvorichna, Panькivka, and Volodymyrivka. So far, there have been no changes along the front line here, but now nobody doubts that this is not just sabotage and reconnaissance groups, as officials previously told us in an attempt to hide the truth. In fact, the Russians have entrenched themselves strongly in this area, and the Ukrainian forces are now trying to drive them out and are making huge efforts to do so. For now, however, the front line remains unchanged. In the Pokrovsk direction, the Russians are storming the city of Rodinske and Krasny Lyman, pushing forward near Novoekonomichne and Moskovske, and attacking the villages of Promень, Lysivka, and Chunishine, as well as the outskirts of Pokrovsk. They are also attempting breakthroughs near Zvirove and Kotline. Heavy battles are underway for Udachne and Molodetske. Over the past day, there have been no confirmed changes, but the level of activity remains extremely high, and holding the defense is getting harder with each passing day. Soldiers on the ground describe the situation like this. Fierce fighting continues on the Dobropillia front. In Kucherev Yar and the nearby village, the clearing operation is still not complete. It's tough there. Too many Russians dug in. In other areas, things are more or less stable, and our forces are trying to stabilize the forward line of defense. If we can establish a defensive line along Pankivka, Nikanorovka, that would be a big success. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. It's extremely difficult. On the Pokrovsk front, the Russians are trying to capture Udachne and are even sending small infantry groups into the area of that very mine that many wrote about last summer. But the Russians still haven't reached it. Near Rodinsk, the situation is becoming critical. The city itself is being terrorized by small infantry units and sabotage recon groups, while to the northeast, east, and south of the city, very serious problems are brewing. So, in reality, the situation is deteriorating day by day. In the Novopavlivka direction, the Russians continue trying to break through the fields toward the city, while also storming Dachne, Zelený High, Alexandrograd, and Voskresenka. The situation remains very difficult as the Russians launch over 20 assaults daily. However, so far they haven't been able to advance further, and in the past 24 hours there have been no confirmed changes along the front line. In the Velyka Novosilka direction, the Russians are assaulting the village of Temirivka and attempting breakthroughs near Maliyivka and Kumushovaha. Over the past day, there have been no confirmed changes, but the front here is gradually sagging, and Ukrainian forces are occasionally forced to withdraw to more favorable positions. In the Gulay-Pole direction, the Russians didn't launch new assaults, and no changes were recorded during the past day. In the Zaporizhia direction, the Russians continue the attacks on Novoandriivka and carry out shelling of the village ahead of assaults. Fighting also continues in the area of Kamyansk, where Ukrainian forces periodically conduct counterattacks, while Russian troops attempt to advance toward Stepnohirsk. Although no changes were recorded over the past day, the battle is ongoing. In the Kherson direction, the Russians are pushing forward on the islands and in the area of the Antonivsky Bridge. Their activity is very high, with up to 10 assaults per day already recorded. This is quite a significant figure for this sector, but Ukrainian forces are managing to repel them using FPV drones. So far, no changes have been confirmed over the past day. Now let's move to the Siversk direction. Here, the Russians are trying to advance toward Yampil, assaulting Serebryanka near Dronivka and pushing near Grigorievka and Vyimka. However, they made no gains over the past day, and the front line remains unchanged. In the Lyman direction, the situation has seriously worsened. As I mentioned a few days ago, activity here is so high that sooner or later the front will be breached. Today, the Russians managed to fully capture Yampolivka, Kolodezi, and Zelena Dolina. The advance was 2.5 kilometers near Yampolivka, 2 kilometers 200 meters near Kolodezi, 5 kilometers 300 meters closer to Drobusheva, and 4 kilometers beyond Zelena Dolina. At the same time, Ukrainian forces have also made gains, advancing 2 kilometers toward Ritkodub. As we can see, Ukrainian forces are conducting counterattacks, but unfortunately, the Russians have advanced much more than the Ukrainian units. While the Ukrainian forces tried to cut this section of the front, the Russians have already expanded it. Thus, the situation continues to deteriorate. In the Borova direction, the Russians are assaulting Stepove and Chernyshina, but over the past day there have been no changes, and so far all attacks have been successfully repelled. In the Kupiansk direction, the Russians continue to assault Holubivka, breaking through to the outskirts of Kupiansk, attacking Petropavlivka, and advancing past Stepova Novosilka. However, despite high activity, there have been no changes so far. In the Dvorichna direction, the Russians are advancing toward the village of Kolodezne, but haven't achieved any success, and over the past day the situation hasn't changed. In the Velykyi Burluk direction, the Russians are assaulting Ambarne and attempting to expand the territory under their control. However, the Ukrainian forces continue to repel all attacks, and the front line remains unchanged over the past day. In the Kharkiv direction, the Russians are assaulting the village of Hlyboke and trying to fully bring it under their control. Frontline areas continue to be shelled, but over the past day there have been no changes. In Vovchansk, no new assaults were recorded today, and the situation has so far stabilized. In the Sumy direction, the Russians are advancing toward Kindrativka and across the border, but activity is low and there are no changes. In the area of the village of Tetkina, the Russians are not conducting any new attacks, and the situation remains unchanged. Meanwhile, the US Secretary of Treasury spoke about how India is helping Russia conduct the war.
Let's go back and look at the history, though, Becky. And look, China importing it is suboptimal. But if you go back and look pre-22, pre-invasion, 13% of China's oil was already coming from Russia. Now it's 16. So China has a diversified input of their oil. If you go back and look now, I believe India had less than 1% of their oil, 1%, and now I believe it's up to 42. So
wow.
India is just profiteering, or they are just profiteering. They are reselling. They've made $16 billion in excess profits, some of the richest families in India. So this is a completely different thing. Like this India, what I would call the Indian arbitrage, buying cheap Russian oil, reselling it as product, has just sprung up during the war, which is unacceptable.
Friends, what do you think about this? Why has Trump still not imposed strong sanctions to stop Russia? Be sure to share your thoughts in the comments. And that's all from me. So please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on all the latest news. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye bye.